It wasn't shouted in anger, it wasn't said in the middle of a fight, or under the influence of too much champagne. It was whispered softly, like a secret meant to be cherished. "Don't tell anyone you're my mom." She leaned in, smile still plastered on her face, a hand resting lightly on my shoulder as if that gentleness could soften the blade. The shop assistant stood nearby, clipping fabric around her waist, murmuring compliments about the fit. Pale roses spilled across the carpet. The chandelier above us glittered with a light I couldn't feel. I stood there, holding a lavender dress against my chest. My palms were damp. The silk clung to my skin, cool and distant, like wearing someone else's life. The kind where mothers don't exist, not visibly, not proudly. The moment she said it, the words didn't echo, they settled, quiet, heavy, like dust you don't see until the light shifts just right. She didn't look at me after, just turned back to the mirror, eyes bright with excitement, her reflection surrounded by everything new. And I nodded. That was my answer, not because I agreed, not because I understood, but because that's what I'd always done. I nodded when she wanted to quit piano, nodded when she said she'd marry a man she'd only known 6 months, nodded when she asked if I could handle the florist, the catering, the venue deposits because she was too overwhelmed. I paid the deposit on the dress that same afternoon. While she laughed with her bridesmaids by the register, I stepped into the back hallway, opened my checkbook, and wrote my name where it wouldn't be seen. Not on the invitations, not in the ceremony program, not on the seating chart, but it was my signature that kept the whole event afloat. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when she clung to me like breath. I remember her sobbing at the kitchen table, 14 and devastated. A boy had broken her heart. I made cocoa. I rubbed her back. I told her he'd regret it one day, that no one with eyes and sense would leave someone like her. That night, she fell asleep in my lap, breathing softly, her hand wrapped around mine. Back then, my love was something she didn't question. It was as certain as the sun coming up, as simple as toast in the morning and shoes by the door. She never asked where things came from. The lunches, the uniforms, the late-night rides. She didn't see the nurse shifts, the doubles I pulled to afford field trip fees, the way I'd tape my arches and keep moving because we needed the overtime. She used to call me Mama. Somewhere along the way, I just became her. At the wedding rehearsal, the photographer, a sweet young man with a clipboard and a sharp eye, glanced at me and asked, "Bride or groom's side?" I opened my mouth, closed it, smiled politely and stepped aside. Even then, I hoped maybe she'd change her mind, maybe it was nerves, maybe it was temporary. She once said to me, not long before the wedding, "You know how people area, it's just easier this way." Easier. That's what my presence had become, a complication, a wrinkle in an otherwise curated day. On the wedding morning, I dressed slowly. Lavender, again. It was the color Haley said suited me best. I'd bought the gown quietly, without asking for her opinion. I didn't want to burden her with another decision. I slipped on my nurse shoes, the old white pair with soft soles, the ones she used to tease me about. She once said, "Other moms don't wear hospital shoes." I remember laughing, not because it was funny, but because she was right. I wore those shoes for every 12-hour shift that paid for her braces, every Thanksgiving night spent working triage so she could have a new winter coat. I wore them to parent conferences, to funerals, to PTA meetings where I nodded and smiled and prayed I didn't smell like antiseptic. I arrived early, before the ushers. The venue smelled like roses and starch. I stood in the back, out of the way, and watched the coordinator walk past me 3 times without a glance. The family table was full. Name cards, linen napkins, tiny gold place settings. I searched for mine. There was a seat reserved for the groom's aunt. I was escorted to the vendor table. By the time they toasted the bride's parents, I had stopped scanning the room. The groom teared up during his father's speech. Haley glowed. And when they clinked glasses, no one said my name, but the portrait said enough. A single candid photograph, snapped between posed shots, caught me standing to the side. Lavender dress, pale clutch in hand, half smile stretched too tight, like a woman pretending she wasn't invisible. The photo arrived weeks later. The photographer must have sent it by mistake. There was no caption, just a subject line. "You should have this." I saved it, not because I needed a reminder, but because even if no one else saw me, I knew I had been there. I paid for the bouquet she held. I chose the flowers for the archway. I wrote the check for the quartet. I paid every invoice quietly, fully, and without credit. And on her wedding night, while she danced in candlelight and laughter, I slipped the envelope into the bridal suite. No note, no signature, just a check. I drove home alone, lavender dress still buttoned, shoes tied on my aching feet. The door to my apartment closed behind me with a soft click. In the quiet, I hung the dress in a plastic garment bag, sat down on the edge of my bed, and exhaled. It wasn't peace I felt, not quite. It was something colder. It was clarity. It started with the caterer, or maybe the invitations. No, if I'm honest, it began long before that. But the first time I truly felt it, the first time it settled in my bones like a slow ache, was in her kitchen. A simple Tuesday morning, a coffee cup in my hand, my reading glasses sliding down my nose. Haley was going over her checklist, flipping through printouts like a secretary with a deadline. "You're still good to meet the florist at noon?" she asked without looking up. I nodded. "Yes. And I can swing by the bakery after." She smiled but not at me, at her screen. "Perfect. Just confirm the flavors almond with lemon mousse, and make sure they got the sugar flower colors right this time." I took a sip of lukewarm coffee. "Would you like me to ask about samples?" That got her attention. She blinked once, confused. "Samples? For the cake? I thought you and Nathan might want to try a number. We already did a tasting last month." Her voice wasn't cruel, just matter of fact, like it hadn't occurred to her that I might want to be included. Like the cake I was paying for wasn't something I'd ever be allowed to taste. I nodded again, slower this time. "Of course, I'll just confirm the details." She was back on her laptop before I'd finished the sentence. "It's funny what you remember." The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and dryer sheets that morning. Her laundry had just finished tumbling, and I'd folded a few towels to keep my hands busy while she rattled off instructions. Once, this same kitchen had been a battlefield of science projects and school lunches. I used to pack them with little notes, stickers, sandwiches cut into shapes. She used to tell me they were embarrassing, but she'd never leave the house without them. Now, I watched her set her mug down without a coaster and wipe her hands on the jeans she used to mock me for buying on clearance. "Mom," she said suddenly, still focused on her laptop, "can you also Venmo me for the quartet deposit?" They bumped their fee. "How much?" I asked gently. "Only $400. I already covered it for now. You can just send it later." $400 only. I took another sip of coffee, more to buy time than to enjoy it. "I'll write a check," I said. "I'm not great with Venmo." She didn't answer, just made a humming sound and went back to scrolling. After she left for work, I stayed a while longer. It wasn't intentional. My coat was on the chair, my keys already in my hand, but I stood at the sink for a few extra minutes, rinsing a mug that wasn't mine, wiping a counter that didn't need it. The fridge hummed steadily. Outside, wind tugged at the hedges. The house was quiet, save for the faint tap of the cat's tail against the floor. I looked around, at the vase of white tulips on the island, at the framed engagement photo on the wall of Haley and Nathan in matching beige sweaters, smiling like a magazine cover. I wasn't in a single picture in that house. I'd noticed it before, but today, it felt louder. Later that week, I called to confirm the florals. The woman on the phone was sweet, efficient, and very enthusiastic. "We've got the bride's bouquet, 5 bridesmaids, 2 corsages, and the arbor design, all under the Carterwells account." I hesitated. "Could you please list that under Haley Merritt? That's her maiden name, and a broken bar. It's my billing information." She paused. "Of course, I'll make the correction." "Will she be picking up the arrangements herself?" "No," I said. "I'll be there for delivery." Another pause. "And are you a question mark?" She didn't finish. "I'm the mother of the bride," I answered, trying to keep my voice level. "Though I suppose you're not supposed to know that." She laughed politely. Not understanding, I hung up and stared at the notepad on my kitchen table. 3 vendors circled, my handwriting, my money, my absence. That Sunday, I offered to bring lunch, just sandwiches, nothing extravagant. Haley opened the door with her phone to her ear and a to-do list in her eyes. "Kitchen's free," she said. "Nathan's folks are on the porch if you want to say hello." I didn't, but I smiled. Of course. I unpacked the sandwiches, set them out on a platter, poured lemonade into the good glasses. She hadn't asked me to, but old habits die harder than pride. Haley walked in halfway through and lifted a sandwich, then paused. "Oh," she said, "I forgot to tell you, we won't need you to stay for the dress rehearsal dinner. It's just going to be us and Nathan's immediate family." I felt my hands tighten around the lemonade pitcher. "Oh, all right. It's just simpler that way," she said quickly, not meeting my eyes. "You know how it is, simpler." I nodded. That word again. After she left the room, I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the sandwich I'd made for myself. I wasn't hungry anymore. That night, I found myself in front of my closet, pulling down the lavender dress to check for wrinkles. I ran my hands over the fabric, smoothing it. It was still beautiful, still unworn. I folded it carefully back into its bag, then opened the drawer where I kept my nursing shoes. I hadn't worn them in a year. My back no longer allowed shifts on the floor, but I'd kept them clean. I lifted one shoe and turned it in my hands. The sole had begun to wear thin. My initials were still faintly visible on the insignia drawn in marker. Long ago, when hospital laundry could swallow your life if you weren't careful. Those shoes carried me through every hard season. Haley's childhood fevers, her piano recitals, her teenage nights out that always ran too late, every sacrifice, every double shift. And now, she didn't want anyone to know I was her mother. But still I'd paid the deposits. I always did. It's a strange thing, disappearing while standing right in the middle of a room. Most days, I don't notice it. The absence of acknowledgement doesn't shout, it hums. Like the low buzz of a refrigerator you only hear when the rest of the house goes quiet. It's in the small things. The way they forget to pour me a cup of coffee when they're brewing a pot. The way I find out about venue walkthroughs only after they've happened. The group text that skips my name, but includes Nathan's cousin from Denver. And still I keep showing up, out of habit, maybe, out of some stubborn, foolish loyalty, or because it's what mothers do, especially mothers like me. Every morning I make tea the same way, one bag, steeped exactly 4 minutes, splash of milk, no sugar. I used to make 2 cups, one for me, one for Haley, back when she lived under my roof and the morning sun hit the old kitchen table just right. She used to sit in her pajamas, curled in the chair like a cat, scribbling homework or texting boys she didn't want me to know about. She never finished her tea, said it tasted too grown up. Now I still make the 2 cups, out of muscle memory. Then I pour one down the sink. The waste of it doesn't sting anymore. It's just part of the rhythm. Like boiling an egg I won't eat. Like setting a place I won't fill. This morning, I cleaned the silver, not because it needed it, but because the cloth was already out and I needed to keep my hands moving. I wiped down each fork, each spoon, pieces of a set we used to save for holidays. Haley used to love the tiny dessert forks, said they made her feel fancy. They're packing up now, she and Nathan, moving into a new house, bigger, newer, with walk-in closets and marble countertops. They asked me to help sort some of the things they don't want to take with them. She handed me a box last week and labeled miscellaneous, then turned back to her phone. Inside, old photos, birthday cards, her baby blanket. I didn't say anything, just quietly tucked the blanket into my own bag. It smelled faintly of lavender, though I don't know if that was real or just memory playing tricks. Sometimes, I catch myself setting the table for 2. Then I remember, it's just me now. I cook out of habit meals meant for more than one. Stews, roasts, enough pasta for a small army. And afterward, I pack the leftovers neatly into containers and label them with dates, though there's no one else here to confuse them. I offered to bring dinner to Haley's the other week. She smiled politely. "Oh, that's sweet of you. But we're doing keto right now." "You know how it is." I nodded. Of course, I always do, even when I don't understand, even when keto sounds less like a diet and more like another excuse to keep me on the doorstep. I brought the casserole anyway, left it on the porch in a glass dish wrapped in foil. It was still warm when I turned to go. She never mentioned it again. The florist called to confirm the final centerpiece count. I answered, as always, with my notebook in hand. Just a heads up, she added. We got a call from the planner. She said the mother of the bride might not be available for photos, so we should coordinate with the maid of honor instead. I felt my pen pause on the page. "Yeah, broken bar C," I said. And that was all. After I hung up, I crossed my own name off the contact list and wrote Clarima in neat script beneath it. That's when it hit me. Not the cruelty. There was none. Just efficiency. I was being replaced, not by another woman, but by the collective ease of a wedding that had no room for complications, no room for reality. They weren't rewriting me, they were erasing me, and I was helping them do it. Haley's fiancé copyright texted me last week, asked if I could pick up the remaining balance for the rehearsal dinner since they were spread thin that month. The phrasing was casual, almost apologetic. I replied yes before I'd even finished reading the message. Then I sat in silence for a long time, holding the phone in my hand like it might say something else, like it might offer thanks. It didn't. I wrote the check that night, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it with shaking fingers. On the front, I wrote Caterer A514 in small print. No note, no name, just a check. I walk more these days, around the block, down to the park where young mothers push strollers and old men read newspapers on benches. I pass the bakery where I once bought Haley's birthday cakes, the library where she got her first card, the shoe store where we argued about heels versus flats for her 8th grade dance. Everything around me remembers, even when she doesn't. The clerk at the grocery store still asks, "How's your daughter?" I smile and say, "Busy with the wedding." I don't say, "She asked me not to tell anyone I'm her mother," because what would that woman say? What could anyone say to that? This morning, I found a thank you card in the mail. Not from Haley, from the planner. "Thank you for your continued support and generosity. We look forward to a seamless celebration." The signature was printed, a digital stamp. It's strange to feel more seen by a stranger than by your own child, but stranger still is how accustomed I've grown to it. Every night now, I hang up the lavender dress to let the fabric breathe. I smooth the creases. I check the hem. It will be beautiful, I'm sure. It just won't be mine. The funny thing is, there was a time when she couldn't sleep unless I was beside her. She used to come padding down the hallway in her footed pajamas, the ones with tiny ducks printed across the feet, her thumb tucked in her mouth and her eyes blinking against the dark. "Mama," she'd whisper, "can I sleep with you?" I never said number, not once, not even when my back ached from a long shift or when my eyes barely stayed open. I'd lift the blanket, and she'd crawl in like it was the safest place in the world, and it was. Back then, I was her whole world, the one she ran to with skinned knees and broken crayons, the one she clung to during thunderstorms and school dances. I was not just her mother, I was her compass. There was a dia clear as glass in my memory of when she stood in the doorway of the kitchen holding her acceptance letter to the state university. Her hands were shaking so hard I thought she might drop it. "They want me," she said, eyes wide. I dropped the dish I was scrubbing, hands still wet, and pulled her into a hug so tight it startled her. "Of course they want you," I said into her hair. "You're brilliant." She wept then, not out of fear or sadness, out of relief. Later that evening, we sat at the tiny kitchen table going over expenses. I didn't flinch at the numbers, I just opened my old savings ledger, the one with coffee stains and grocery lists tucked inside. "I'll cover what you can't," I told her. "But, Mom, that's sure." I waved her off. "Don't worry about me. You go and be who you're meant to be." She cried again then, and kissed my cheek. I still feel that kiss, some nights. Another time, years before college, when she was no taller than my heap, as she stood in front of her class for Mother's Day. Each child had to say one thing they loved about their mom. Some said cooking, some said car rides. One little boy said, "My mom lets me play video games." Haley waited until last. She stepped forward, pigtails swinging, and declared, My mom is my best friend, and she makes the best grilled cheese." The teacher laughed. I did too, but something in me swelled. That kind of pure, unfiltered love, yeah, you think it'll last forever. You don't imagine a day when she'll introduce someone else as her family and ask you to stay in the background. The kitchen in our old house was never clean, not like the one she has now. Ours smelled of toast and laundry detergent, of shoe polish and strong coffee. The table wobbled, the chairs were mismatched, but there was a laughter, stories, homework spread across the counter while I cooked dinner in my scrubs. She used to leave notes on the fridge. "Good luck, Mama. Before a big shift, you got this." When I had to give a presentation at the hospital. Now, the fridge in her home holds magnets shaped like wine bottles and a postcard from Italy. No notes, not even a photo of us. The last time she hugged me in public was at her college graduation. I remember because she leapt off the stage, her cap flying, and barreled straight into my arms. Nathan hadn't even arrived yet. I held her like I did when she was 5 and scared of the dark. "You did it," I whispered. "No, we did it," she said, and I believed her. I held that moment close for years, carried it like a pebble in my pocket, rubbed it smooth with memory until I could feel its shape in my sleep. Sometimes, I take out the photo albums. The old days as a before digital storage made us all careless. There's one picture of us baking cookies in the dead of winter, flour on our noses, her eyes bright and mischievous. Another of her in a yellow raincoat, holding my hand so tightly you'd think she'd never let go. She used to wear my clothes, sneak into my closet and try on my shoes, clomp down the hallway like she was heading to a board meeting. "You walk like you mean it, Mama," she once said. "I want to walk like that." And for a while, she did. Now, she walks ahead of me, not even looking back. Even the way she used to say my namia mama has changed. It became Mom in middle school. Then Ma when she was tired. Now it's "Can you, will you, thanks." Never mean, just a broken bar transactional. The shift was slow. I didn't notice it at first. Like watching the tide go out. The sand looks the samia until you realize how far the water's gone. I miss her the most in the morning. That's when I'd pack her lunch. Peanut butter sandwiches, no crust, apple slices dipped in lemon so they wouldn't brown. A napkin folded with a note. "You've got this, love, Mom." Now, I still make tea, still toast my bread, still fold the napkin beside my plate. No one reads the note, but I write them anyway. Sometimes in my mind, sometimes aloud, sometimes just in the way I butter the toast. Because some habits are stitched into the soul, because love, even unreturned, doesn't forget how to speak. I told myself it was just stress, that maybe she hadn't meant Ida. That whisper in the boutique, the chill that followed. Maybe she'd come to her senses, pull me close before the ceremony, press a lipstick kiss to my cheek and say, "I'm sorry, Mom." I don't know what I was thinking. It wouldn't have taken much. Just a look, just one thread of warmth. Even an afterthought would have been enough. I gave her space that week. Didn't call, didn't text. I wanted to believe she'd reach out on her own. I wanted it to be her idea. 3 days before the wedding, a package arrived. No note, just a lavender clutch to match my dress and a small printout with the event schedule. The font was elegant, the edges gold foiled. Every minute accounted for. My name was nowhere on it, but I let myself believe anyway. She was busy, caught up in planning. Once she saw me standing there in the dress she'd chosen, holding the bouquet I'd arranged, watching her walk down the aisle. She would remember. She would remember who packed her lunch in 3rd grade and drove her to every after-school rehearsal, who stayed awake with the flu herself just to cool her forehead during those feverish winter nights, who never said number. The night before the wedding, I laid everything out with quiet care. Lavender dress, pearl earrings, the old shoes cleaned and buffed, the clutch. I even steamed the hem, though I knew no one would be looking that closely. I sat down at the vanity and smoothed a bit of powder onto my cheeks, just enough to soften the lines. I twisted my hair into a low chignon, and nothing elaborate, just neat, presentable. My reflection looked back at me, hopeful and afraid. I told myself, "She'll see you. You raised her better than this." That was the hope I tucked between the folds of my dress as I hung it on the door. I arrived early the next morning, as requested in the schedule. The venue was stunning. Pale linens catching the sunlight through tall windows, white roses blooming in centerpieces I'd paid for. I saw her bouquet laid out on a satin cloth, delicate and perfect, a white ranunculus and gardenias, just as she asked. The staff moved around me like I wasn't there. One of the young coordinators handed me a program without a glance. "Guest list?" she asked. I opened my mouth, hesitated, then handed her the invitation I'd brought. She marked a clipboard, handed it back. No name badge, no seating chart update, no greeting. Still, I smiled. That same tight, worn smile that nurses learn early, the one that says everything is under control, even when it isn't. When I spotted Haley down the hallway, framed by soft drapes and soft light, my breath caught. She looked radiant, joyful. Her laughter rang out like bells as her maid of honor adjusted the veil. I stood in the doorway, not quite entering. She glanced my way. For a moment, I thought, this is it. She'll say something, her eyes will fill. She'll come forward, open her arms. Instead, she looked past me to the photographer and smiled. I stepped back before he could catch me in the frame. They took family portraits in the garden. I wasn't asked to join. I stood behind a flowering bush and watched Nathan's parents wrap their arms around Haley's waist, cheeks pressed close, teeth gleaming in the sun. There were cousins, friends, coworkers I didn't recognize. No one looked around. No one noticed the woman in lavender near the hedge, holding a gift bag that matched her dress. I turned before they called the next group and walked slowly back inside. My heels clicked quietly against the stone path, each step a beat of something giving way. At the reception, I found my seat near the kitchen doors, a folding chair beside the DJ's assistant and the extra linens. The name card just said Mary. No last name, no title, just Mary. I sat quietly as people mingled and filled the room with voices that didn't include mine. Dinner was served, a blessing was said, toasts followed. The groom's father spoke of family, of legacy, of the beautiful bond between a daughter and her father. Haley beamed. Guests clapped. Someone dabbed at their eyes. My fork hovered above the salad. I never took a bite. After the dancing began, I stepped outside. The air was cool, the music muffled by the walls. I sat on a bench beneath a string of patio lights, the clutch in my lap, the envelope tucked neatly inside. It held more than money. It held years, a lifetime, everything I had left to give. I looked down at the envelope, thought about adding a note, just a line, a sentence to remind her I was there. I reached for a pen, then stopped. What would I even write? What could be said that hadn't already been offered in silence? I stayed until the bouquet toss. Then I stood, dusted off my dress, and made my way upstairs to the bridal suite. No one stopped me, no one saw. I stepped into the empty room, laid the envelope gently on the dresser, and ran my fingers once along the edge. The air smelled faintly of perfume and lilies. Her perfume. I turned, closed the door behind me. It latched with a soft click. Not angry, not dramatic, just final. I didn't cry on the drive home, not even when the road turned empty, the headlights catching nothing but pavement and the occasional low-swept branch. I just drove via hands at 10 and 2, the way they taught me in the 70s. The dress pinched at the waist. My shoes ached, and my ears rang with the echo of music I wasn't invited to dance to. There's a kind of tired they don't talk about in magazines or wellness columns. It's not the tired you get from lack of sleep. It's the kind that comes from being unseen, from giving everything of yourself at time, money, memory, love, and still not being enough to make it into the frame. It lives in the bones, quietly, like mold in a wall. You don't notice until one day you sit down and realize everything hurts and nothing was built for you. The apartment was dark when I got in. I didn't turn on the lights, just let the door close softly behind me and stood there for a long while, clutch still in hand, fingers stiff with age and something heavier. The lavender dress rustled as I moved, brushing past the coat rack, The table with its single lamp and stack of unopened mail, everything looked the same, but it wasn't, or maybe I wasn't. I peeled the dress off like a second skin and hung it carefully in the plastic garment bag. I didn't cry, I didn't curse, I didn't crumble to the floor in a cinematic heap. That kind of grief belongs to people who are still expecting something. This was different. This was the quiet realization that no one would ask how the wedding went. No one would ask if I danced, if I laughed, if I wore the earrings she gave me when she was 10, the little plastic pearls she saved her allowance to buy. No one remembered those things, not even her. I sat on the edge of my bed, bare feet on the rug I'd crocheted the year she left for college. I used to say it kept me grounded. Now, it just itched. I thought about the bouquet she carried, how I'd fought with the florist about the garden I also Haley hated how strong they smelled, but the planner insisted. I had stepped in, quietly, paid the extra, changed the order, made sure she'd have something she actually wanted, and still, not a word, not a thank you, not a glance, not a whisper in the hallway like she used to do when she was little, saying, "Mama, you always fix everything." I don't fix things anymore, I just fund them. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I sat up long after midnight, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car in the distance. My hands ached, not from arthritis but from stillness, from holding too much for too long. I opened my drawer and pulled out a photo. Haley at 5, front tooth missing, hair in pigtails, standing next to me in the hospital cafeteria on Bring Your Child to Work Day. She's beaming. I look exhausted, my scrubs are wrinkled, there's a coffee stain on my pocket, but I'm smiling too. Back then, she clung to me. Now, I can't even tell people I'm her mother. It's not the wedding that broke me. It's not even the words she whispered that day in the boutique. It's everything in between. The small cuts, the silent meals, the subtle erasures, the way love becomes labor, and labor becomes expectation, and expectation becomes a broken bar in visibility. I used to think dignity meant keeping your head high, enduring, being the bigger person. Now I think dignity is something else entirely. Maybe it's knowing when you've given enough, when you've shown up enough, when silence stops being grace and starts being surrender. I am tired of surrendering. Morning came gray and quiet. I made tea, sat by the window, watched a bird hop across the sill, cock its head, and fly away. She wouldn't call. I knew that now. There would be no recap, no photos sent just for you, Mom, no acknowledgement that I had been the scaffolding behind the whole sparkling day. But I had been there, even if no one noticed, even if my name never touched a napkin or a seating chart or a speech. I was there, and maybe that's the cruelest part of all. You can give someone everything, and still find yourself sitting alone in the dark, wondering if any of it mattered. It came on a Tuesday, 3 days after the wedding. I was folding laundry, moving slowly more from habit than fatigue. The living room smelled of lavender and starch. A breeze slipped through the window screen, stirring the hem of the dress still hanging in its plastic shroud. I hadn't touched it since that night. I hadn't needed to. It was no longer a dress for a celebration. It was a relic now of something I couldn't quite name. Not grief, not anger, something duller, like when your favorite song plays and you don't reach to turn it up anymore. The dryer buzzed, and I stood there, one towel half folded, when I heard the ping. Email. I crossed the room, still holding the towel, and clicked the notification. It was from the photographer, not Haley, not the planner. Subject line: "You should have this." No message, just a single attachment. I opened it, and there I was, in the lavender dress, standing alone, framed between two beams of late afternoon light. My hands were clasped neatly in front of me, my clutch hung from one wrist. I was looking off to the side toward the dance floor, though no one stood near me. The photo wasn't posed, it wasn't flattering, it wasn't softened or retouched, but it was honest. I didn't look sad, I didn't even look angry. I looked a broken bar like someone who just remembered something they hadn't allowed themselves to know for a very long time. I stared at it for a long while, not because I liked the photo, not because I needed the proof, but because in that unguarded frame, I saw something I hadn't seen in myself for years. I saw presence, not performance, not service, not obligation. Presence. There was no name on the program, no toast, no family table, but I was there, fully, physically, silently. I had shown up, in spite of the exclusion, in spite of the humiliation, and not because I was small or spineless or didn't know better, because I loved her, because for all the ways she erased me, I could never undo what it meant to be her mother. But now I understood something else. Being her mother didn't mean staying silent forever. I didn't print the photo. I didn't frame it or post it online or add it to an album. I simply saved it in a folder on my desktop, labeled it with a date, closed the lid of the laptop, and exhaled. There was no dramatic swell of the music, no cinematic montage of rediscovery, just a quiet click, a small internal shift. I folded the towel, put it on the stack, reached for another, but something in me had settled, or maybe it had stirred, not in defiance, not yet, just awareness. That evening, I stood in front of my closet. The lavender dress still hung where I left it. I ran a hand across the plastic cover, fingers tracing the curve of the shoulder seam. It was beautiful, yes, but it would never be worn again. It had served its purpose. I unzipped the garment bag, laid the dress carefully into a storage box, and slid it beneath my bed. Not out of shame, not out of sorrow, out of choice. There's a power in deciding you won't wait for someone to remember you, a power in stepping out of the shadows, and not with anger, but with certainty. I hadn't reached that moment yet, but I could feel it coming, like the first shift in the air before a storm, like a door cracking open in a room you thought was sealed shut, and once that door opens, and no matter how quietly, it doesn't close the same way again. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. No dramatic exit, no farewell calls, no handwritten note left on the counter like in those old movies I used to watch with Haley when we still shared popcorn and secrets. I simply packed a small bag, set the thermostat to away, and locked the door behind me. The lavender dress stayed folded under the bed. The clutch, too. I brought only what I needed: a comfortable shoes, a worn paperback, my mother's rosary, and the envelope the planner had returned to me by mistake. They hadn't cashed the check. At first, I thought it was an oversight, that maybe Haley had forgotten to deposit it after the honeymoon, but the envelope was unopened, pristine. I held it in my hand for a long while that morning, tracing the seal, remembering how carefully I had tucked the corners of that check into place. No name, no note, just what I thought love was supposed to look like: quiet, unconditional, uncredited. But now, I saw it for what it was: a silence I had paid for. Again and again. I walked down to the bank just after it opened. The teller was kinda young, with nervous fingers and a gentle voice. "Would you like to cancel the check?" she asked. I looked down at it, still sealed. "Yes," I said. "Do you need to write a replacement?" I shook my head. "Number. I think we're done funding things that don't see me." She blinked but didn't ask questions, just nodded. "We'll take care of it." And just like that, quietly, without ceremony, I kept something for myself. That afternoon, I bought a train ticket, not far, just a few hours away, to a town by the coast I hadn't visited in decades. Haley was little the last time we'd gone. She'd built a lopsided sandcastle and cried when the tide swept it away. I'd told her, "Everything you build with love finds its way back to you." I hadn't known, back then, how untrue that could feel. But I still loved the sea, still loved the sound of it, steady and unapologetic. So I went. The motel was simple, clean, a faded welcome mat at the door, curtains with tiny sailboats stitched along the edges. I unpacked slowly, savoring the emptiness. No to-do lists, no vendor calls, no one expecting anything from me. For the first time in years, I didn't have to explain myself. I walked down to the shoreline in the early evening, wind tugging at the hem of my jacket. My feet sank into the sand, soft and cold, and I stood there, watching the horizon blur into the mist. There was no epiphany, no soundtrack swelling beneath the sky, just breath, just space, and the quiet, steady realization that I didn't need to be claimed to exist. Back at the motel, I wrote in my old journal, the one I hadn't touched since Haley started high school. I used to write letters to her there, little thoughts I was saving for someday. Tonight, I wrote to myself, not a speech, not a reckoning, just a single line: I am allowed to live, even if no one thanks me for it. The next morning, I treated myself to breakfast at the little diner off the boardwalk. The waitress called me honorable. I left a tip big enough to make her eyes widen. That felt good. That felt like me. I bought a postcard from a souvenir shop, one with a watercolor of the pier. I didn't write her name on it. I didn't even write mine, just the words: I was here, I mattered, even if no one said so. Then I mailed it to my own address, because maybe the only person who needed to remember was me. I returned home on a Wednesday. The apartment smelled faintly of dust and lavender. The sun filtered through the blinds in narrow stripes, landing on the stack of mail I'd left unopened. Everything was just as I'd left it, but I wasn't. The postcard had arrived. There it sat alone in the pile nestled between a catalog and a bill. The watercolor pier, washed in soft blues and gray, stood out like it didn't belong, and on the back, in my own handwriting: I was here, I mattered, even if no one said so. I turned it over once, twice, then tucked it on the fridge beneath a magnet shaped like a sunflower. It looked right there. It looked like truth. I spent the afternoon tidying, and not out of obligation, but out of care. My care for this space, for my peace. I opened windows, let in fresh air, lit the good candle, the one I always saved for guests who never came. I even played music, not loud, just enough to fill the rooms that had long grown used to silence. When I passed the hallway mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself and didn't look away. There I was, hair a little grayer, eyes more tired than I remembered, but still here, still me. That night, I took the lavender dress from under the bed, not to wear, not to mourn, to put it away. I folded it with care, just as I had before the wedding, but this time, it wasn't penance. It wasn't some limp offering on the altar of motherly duty. It was closure. I didn't cry. I didn't clutch it to my chest or run my fingers across the seams. I simply laid it in a donation box beside a pair of shoes and a purse I no longer needed. Let someone else wear it. Let it begin again with someone who might be seen. The clutch went next, but before I placed it in the box, I opened it one last time. There, tucked inside, was the original copy of the wedding budget, itemized, color-coded, my handwriting on every page. All that quiet orchestration. I held the paper to the light, then slowly, deliberately, tore it in half, then in half again, until all that remained was a stack of silence. The next morning, I walked to the nearest donation center. The woman behind the counter smiled as I handed her the box. "Looks like someone had good taste," she said, lifting the lavender gown. I smiled, too. She did. Once. Then I turned and walked away, not bothering to look back. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally did. About me. I went home and took down the wedding invitation from the corkboard by the phone, slipped it into the same envelope as the program, the RSVP card, and the tiny photo strip from the bridal shower. Then I taped the envelope shut and slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk. Not out of anger, out of release. I didn't need it in plain sight anymore. What had once been a badge of sacrifice was now just paper. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched the sky turn amber. I didn't think about Haley, not in the aching, sharp way. I thought about the next morning, about walking to the market, about starting a new book, about calling someone from the hospital, a friend I hadn't seen since retiring. Small things, but mine, not offerings, not obligations, just life. And when the tea cooled and the sun dipped behind the trees, I stood, walked to the door, and turned the lock. Dana softly. Finally, I closed it behind me. The latch clicked into place with a quiet finality, not a slam, not a bang, but the sound of a chapter ending, and this time, I was the one holding the pen. A month passed, maybe a little more, enough time for the air to shift, for the heat to retreat from the sidewalks, for the leaves outside my window to begin their slow, private burn into gold. I hadn't heard from her, not a call, not a note, not even a forwarded photo from the honeymoon, and strangely a broken bar. I was okay, not numb, not angry, just steady. I filled my days with small joys, morning walks to the park, a new recipe clipped from a magazine, a library card long forgotten at the back of a drawer. I started humming again while I cooked. I planted rosemary on the windowsill. I slept without the weight of someone else's expectations pressing into my chest. This quiet life, it wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and for the first time in years, I wasn't spending it waiting to be asked in. Then, one morning, the email came. No subject line, just a name I recognized. The photographer. I clicked it without thinking. The message was short, barely a sentence. I found this in the final batch. Thought you might want it. No edits, just how it was. The image loaded slowly, and there I was. Same lavender dress, same small smile. But this time, the angle was different. It caught me just outside the garden, just after the ceremony, standing in a wash of sunlight alone. Yes. Boot to broken bar, centered, poised, like I belonged to myself. There was something in my eyes, not sadness, not regret, a kind of peace, as if, somewhere inside, I already knew what I now fully understand. I didn't print the photo, I didn't send a reply, I just saved it, not as evidence, as witness, because maybe no one else told the truth of that day, but this frame did, and I could live with that. Some nights, I still think of her, not in bitterness, just as fact. The way you remember someone who once fit inside your arms like breath. I hope she's happy. I truly do, but her joy is no longer mine to shepherd. That burden, that privilegia was mine for a season, and I carried it well, even when it broke me, even when it cost more than it gave. But now a broken bar. Now I set it down. I opened the window that evening and let the breeze carry the scent of rosemary through the room. Somewhere down the block, wind chimes rang, a sound so gentle, it barely touched the air. And I stood there, in the quiet, not thinking about what I'd given, but what I'd reclaimed, my time, my voice, my name. And when I turned away from the window, I paused at the table and whispered aloud, and not to her, not to Anania, just to myself. I was there, and I mattered. Then I turned off the light, and let the night hold me with nothing but peace.